All right, so I got a couple of pretty good clips here involving former senator and current corporate lobbyist Heidi Heitkamp, as well as former Bernie Sanders campaign manager Faz Shakir on CNN, where basically in a couple of these clips you have Heidi Heitkamp, who is again a corporate lobbyist trying to defend Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema as they try to tank this $3.5 trillion bill, and Faz Shakir basically called her out to her face and called out the corrupting influences that Heidi Heitkamp is involved with, and the CNN host, pretty interestingly and not surprisingly, jumped in to defend this corporate lobbyist. But first, just as a primer clip here, we have Heidi Heitkamp giving us her take on Joe Manchin's pretty blatant and open conflicts of interest that I've talked about many times on this channel. As you guys know, Joe Manchin, he has a coal company that he helped to found. His son now actually runs this company, and Joe Manchin claims that he is in a blind trust and that he has no idea what's going on at this company. Meanwhile, he is taking home hundreds of thousands of dollars from this coal company, and so people have rightfully pointed out, hey, that seems like kind of a conflict of interest if this is the same guy who sits on the Energy Committee who is going to be writing some of the climate portions of these bills. It seems like he is a pretty obvious and glaring conflict of interest. How do you want to answer to that? And Heidi Heitkamp here has some pretty fervent defense for Joe Manchin. So let's go ahead and watch this first clip.
Critics against people like Joe Manchin, for example, will wonder whether he is negotiating in good faith, given that he is on the receiving end of dividends from oil company stocks, right? And at the same time, he may very well be in charge of crafting climate change legislation. So I guess for the American public that may be skeptical about why certain exemptions are not being made or why we're hearing concerns about certain issues, that they're coming from a good faith perspective and background. Can you just lay that out for us, Senator?
Well, what I would tell you is I think the criticisms aren't coming from a good faith basis or background. Joe Manchin is not a liberal. He has been a moderate his whole life. He has been a champion of trying to get the debt and deficit under control. And now when it's easy to say, oh, look, it's because he's got dividends in an oil company, you know, that's why he's unreasonable and that's going to somehow mark him as somebody who's not trustworthy. I find it absolutely outrageous that anyone would say that. He has told you he put his assets in a blind trust. And I will tell you this about Joe Manchin. His integrity is right there in terms of what he believes and where he wants to move this country forward. When people say, oh, he's going to switch sides, I said he's a Democrat. Is there room in the Democratic Party for people who think differently than the Progressive Caucus? There's got to be if we're going to have a ruling majority. And I think this is nothing more than smear tactics on Joe to try and malign his motivations as opposed to trying to respond to his concerns.
Okay, so the concerns that Joe Manchin has are on entirely bullshit issues, okay? So there were so many things that she got completely wrong in that very short diatribe that she just went on. First of all, Joe Manchin is not a moderate, okay? This entire time, we have had the entirety of mainstream media calling these motherfuckers moderates. That implies, that gives the readers, that gives the listeners who are watching this show the implicit idea in the back of their heads that Joe Manchin is somehow being reasonable or he's the moderate centrist in these negotiations, when that's just not true. You know what a moderate would do? A moderate would be supporting policies that are overwhelmingly supported by the American people. That is a moderate. That is a centrist, okay? Joe Manchin is a far-right extremist. He is opposing some of the most popular portions of this bill, like taxing the wealthy, like closing some of these tax loopholes, like lowering prescription drug prices, like actually investing in climate change. I wonder if there's a correlation between not wanting to invest heavily in climate change and making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from your fucking coal company, okay? This is a blatant and out in the open conflict of interest. Heidi Heitkamp has a very difficult time as a corporate lobbyist coming to grips with those conflicts of interest, particularly or specifically because she herself is corrupted by some of those goddamn exact same corrupting influences, okay? So it's not surprising that she would have this sort of take, but it's completely ridiculous. It's completely out of line with reality. Joe Manchin is not a moderate. The policies that he is currently opposing are not moderate, or the policies that he is opposing are moderate. He himself is not a moderate, and so it's just completely ridiculous for her to frame this and to be outraged. She is literally, quote, outraged that people are calling out this blatant conflict of interest. She's not outraged at the fact that he is making hundreds of thousands of dollars from an oil or from a coal company. She is outraged by the fact that people are pointing out this blatant conflict of interest. And so, thankfully, Faz Shakir, we don't have to sit here, just staring angrily at our computer screens, because Faz Shakir actually directly confronted her on her own corruption in this same broadcast. And so here we're going to see this CNN anchor in the next clip coming to her defense. But here is Faz Shakir basically calling out Heidi Heitkamp for her direct conflicts of interest in trying to help tank this bill. and I'm going to show you some of the actual details behind her specific corruption and what she is doing as a lobbyist. But hear from Faz Shakir calling her out directly to her face.
Read for you what one of our reporters, Melanie Zanona, just reported, and that is that Congresswoman Debbie Dingell said that Speaker Pelosi didn't know 2 weeks ago about the document that Manchin signed about wanting that $1.5 trillion price tag. So, and that came from Pelosi directly. So what is going on within the party in the sense of communication?
Amazing. I mean, look at that document. It was signed apparently at the end of July. In August, there were floor votes on the infrastructure bill and on a $3.5 trillion budget resolution bill. And that document was never made public, right? It never got out. It was a closed door secret agreement that had it come out before a Senate voted, I think that we would have been talking a different kind of Senate vote. And this is the problem, right? You are having a backroom closed deal conversation that isn't transparent, that isn't public. So I'm all for it. Hey, senators have different positions. Great, let's have it out. But what I'm concerned about is the influence of corporate lobbyists. I'm concerned about the influence of Senator Heitkamp and her group, right? If the problem here is that we're talking about popular policies that people want, and they are good with taxation of the wealthy to make them pay their fair share, and we are talking about issues that if you go to West Virginia, you go to Montana, you go to North Dakota, you talk about these issues, people are on our side. So we're not fighting over, oh, hey, we're asking you to take a tough vote. We're asking you to deliver for the American public on the pledges that you made, and it is the influence of corporate lobbyists that are cutting this proposal down, that are cutting the president down.
Well, and let's make clear. Let's make clear, no one is questioning the Senator Heitkamp's transparency here. I mean, we are just being transparent going forward. So her intent is not what's on the line here.
I'm questioning the substance of what she is arguing about. I have no problem. Well, I'm taking in good faith that she believes in what she is saying, and obviously she's being funded to say it. However, the results of what she's trying to do is advocate for cutting down on corporate taxation.
Right, so pause the clip right there, and it continues right here.
We have a problem of dynastic wealth in this country.
We've got to wrap this up, but I will say that let's not forget that the senator.
Absolutely not.
And let's not forget this.
When you bring in corporate taxation, this isn't about corporate taxation. This is about individuals being taxed based on the transition or the transaction that their assets would go through. And I want to mention
billionaires,
something.
Senator Heitkamp, billionaires. That's what we're talking about.
I don't want to get inside baseball, guys, here, because we are running out of time and we have to move on to the next topic. Obviously, things are coming down to the wire in Washington right now. I can just say that let's also remind our viewers that Senator Heitkamp lost her seat in the Senate for voting her conscience too. So I don't want to forget history as well.
Okay, so there again, you see it at the end, right? That's how the CNN anchor chooses to moderate this debate that's happening, right? This debate, right? An analogy that immediately popped into my head after I watched both of these clips is, first of all credit to Faz for calling her out directly to her face and calling out the corrupting lobbying influences that are currently trying to tank this bill, which again, we're going to get into the specifics of Heidi Heitkamp, but notice how the CNN anchor responded to this entire situation. It's really analogous to, like, if you were going to have two people on to debate climate change and you had like an actual climate scientist debating an oil executive, and then the climate scientist points out, well, here's what all the data shows, right? The American people overwhelmingly support these policies, or here's what the data shows, climate change is real and it is man-made and this is what we need to do about it. And then the oil lobbyist turns around and he says, well, actually, I don't think that we need to be investing heavily in climate change. And then the CNN moderator turns around and pretends as if, like, we need to be defending this oil lobbyist, or in this case, defending Heidi Heitkamp, right? This is completely ridiculous. It's this false equivalence that a network like CNN, who pretends to be this moral arbiter of truth, right? Who pretends to be this perfect centrist organization that we have to have on both sides, even if one of the sides is demonstrably wrong, in this case, Heidi Heitkamp, and even if one of those sides is entirely corrupt, like Heidi Heitkamp. So Faz was entirely well within the bounds of his rights to call her out for those corrupting influences, and it's amazing that a journalistic outlet, or a supposed journalistic outlet, which if you think about what is the role of the free press in a supposed democracy, right? The entire purpose of a CNN journalist would be to be questioning a lobbyist like Heidi Heitkamp, to be calling out the corrupting influences of lobbyists like Heidi Heitkamp, but instead she has a knee-jerk defense for this entirely corrupted ghoul. It's absolutely laughably absurd, and she throws that in at the end to say, oh, well, she actually lost her seat because she was such a brave warrior and stood up. Shut the fuck up. This is not the job of a journalist. The job of a journalist, as that famous quote goes, is not to have two people on a panel and one of them says it's raining outside and the other one says it's not, and you pretend as if we don't know the answer to that question. Your job as a journalist is to go look outside and see if it's fucking raining or not, and then report that, right? That's the exact same situation that we have right now. Her job as a journalist in this moment is to say, yes, it is accurate that Heidi Heitkamp, who I decided to bring on my show for some reason, is a corporate lobbyist who is working for an organization currently trying to tank this bill, okay? That is the corrupting influence in this entire debate, right? So that would be the job of a journalist, and unfortunately, Foz actually had to do the work for this journalist and actually point that out. But just to give you a perspective on exactly what he was talking about. So as congressional Democrats look to establish a more equitable tax system to pay for spending priorities and overhaul some of the legacy of the Trump tax cuts, she, meaning Heidi Heitkamp, is spearheading a new effort to fight against a proposed change, the elimination of step up in basis, which currently wipes out capital gains tax obligations on inherited investments. It's just one proposal among many to shut down the loopholes that inordinately benefit the very wealthy, but it's an important one that could generate hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue over the next decade. And Heitkamp, beyond her academic and media commitments, now chairs a new nonprofit called Save America's Families Enterprises, a 501c4 dark money operation that does not have to disclose its donors, and the group has committed to a six-figure media buy to oppose this effective manner of clamping down on intergenerational dynastic wealth, along with an inherited tax whose top rate has plummeted from 55% to 40% in the last 2 decades alone, and ending step-up in basis is hardly controversial. Even left-leaning politicians and groups of all types have advocated for its overhaul, and even Larry fucking Summers has called for its elimination here. Okay, so Heidi Heitkamp, again, is an entirely corrupted corporate ghoul who is a lobbyist who is basically coming on CNN to try to push, to back up Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and the rest of these corporate Democrats trying to tank the $3.5 trillion bill and tank some of the ability for them to close some of these tax loopholes that only primarily benefit the extremely wealthy in this country. And CNN is deciding to bring this person on. And then when Faz Shakir, the former campaign manager for Bernie Sanders, accurately points out that she, Heidi Heitkamp, is a perfect example of these corrupting influences in this entire negotiation, the CNN anchor has a knee-jerk reaction to defend Heidi Heitkamp and defend her integrity amid these accusations, instead of actually doing the job of a journalist and questioning them on those conflicts of interest. So I just thought that was a really interesting clip. All credit to Foz for actually going and calling her out directly. This is the type of shit that I would like to see much more of on mainstream media.